Hello, my name is Steve Barnes. I'm product evangelist at LAWO, and today I would like to show you how to use VSM's panel inheritance feature for lightning speed panel configuration. Enjoy! Okay, so let's have a look in the panel configuration process within VSM Studio. And today we want to focus on a new feature called panel inheritance. With the release 20.1, we introduced this new feature, which allows to create panel layouts that act as parent to child panels, and all changes to that parent panel will be reflected on the child panels. In addition to this, also some general configuration changes were introduced. So people of you who are familiar with the product and the panel configuration process already will realize these changes during our next configuration steps. And for those of you who are new to the product, just lean back and enjoy what we have here. So as a first step, I open a little keyboard view in the right upper corner. So you see my hand. You can see if I press any shortcuts here during panel configuration. Mainly used are Control, Shift, Alt, and maybe the arrow keys down there. The spacebar as well is important. Okay, I leave that open in that corner. And then I go to my toolbar of VSM Studio, the top toolbar, and open the panel list. So this is now organized in a tree structure here. So right now we don't see any panels or linked panels because we start from scratch with panel configuration. You will see it right away when we start with creating the panels. So I do a right click here on panels and select new panel. And then I select a panel number, which is the layout ID. Let's start with 1 and give it a name. In this case, I call it engineering. So it's the engineering panel. I skip the other attributes down here for the moment. We may come back here later. Okay. In the next step, I have to select a button template layout or button layout template, which is based on the hardware panel layouts we have. So for half 19-inch, 19-inch, and others. For now, I take LBP 32 because I have a piece of hardware connected, and we can have a look on this as well a little bit later. Okay. Now this editor view opens, which shows me already the button array, but having a look back on our panel list, we already see now this panel appeared in the folder panels as my panel number 1, engineering. Yeah. So it's not one single list, it's now organized in that tree structure. Okay, back to my editor view here. In the panel editor, I am now on my layout view. So what I can do in here is I can make this whole panel bigger or smaller. I can move buttons around by holding them with my left mouse button, dropping them somewhere else, or I can select them and move them with my arrow keys down or up. Also, I can change the size by holding down Shift and moving my arrow keys, and all that stuff I can do in the layout view. What I cannot do in here is to assign functions to that buttons. So therefore I need to create pages. I go in here, I create a new page, and I call it, I create a new first page and call it main page. And right away I create another one, maybe call one which is sources, call another one which is called targets. So what you see now here already is that pages are listed on the left-hand side, also in a tree structure. While before they were organized in the tab style on top of the editor view, which became a long list to the right when it was a panel with many pages. So now that's organized here on the left-hand side, also in the tree structure, similar to what it's represented in the panel list. What we also see in this listing here is that green arrow. That green arrow shows the landing page. So that's the page where you would jump back to when you press an escape button. And an escape button is also maybe the first thing I add to my main page. And therefore I have here my toolbar for the panel editing, and I select the escape button and just drop it here in the right lower corner. And I also can make this, when I look on the other pages, like page 2 and 3, you don't see that escape button, while I would think that an escape button would be a function which could be shown on all pages. So I go here, make a right click on this escape button and select that this is shown on all pages. This gives me this little green star in the corner of the button, which represents or tells me that this is a show on all pages button. Like I mentioned, we are looking here not only on the panel inheritance feature, because we introduced also some other changes to the panel layouting. And since panel inheritance is an addition to the general panel configuration process, we also touch these other configuration aspects here as well. So now when I look on my other pages, sources, targets, you see that escape button as well. You see a difference on the other pages because there we see a yellow star in the corner, which shows that this is a show on all pages button, but not the origin is on a different page, which is on the main page. Also a change now is with this new release is that when you go on another page where you have a show on all pages button and you would like to do a change to this button, like deleting that button, you see that's not possible. It's only possible, obviously, on the page where you create that button. So to find that page, we now know that it's on the main page, but if you would not know, it's now possible to directly get there by a right mouse click and say, go to the defining page of that show on all pages button, and we are directed immediately to the main page where we could do that change and delete that button. But again, I think an escape button makes sense, so I put it there again. And we have it on all pages. Let's proceed building up our panel, but before that we do that, we open VSM panel software instance so we can see the result of our configuration. So I open this on the bottom of the screen. So you see now here a VSM panel showing layout ID 1. And layout ID 1 is what we see here in our panel list. That's ID 1. We call it engineering. And the properties, that's where you can change that number. And that VSM panel instance is showing this layout. Right now it's only the escape button, nothing else we added there. So what we have is 3 pages. We have a main page, a source page, a target page. On my main page, I add now navigation buttons to my sources and targets. So I assign my generic button here. And normally, or some of you may experience already, you want to assign it to another button, but you don't, you are tempted to go back to the toolbar and grab that generic button here again. But what you can do is just by holding down the space bar or by clicking the space bar, you will have that tool again, the previous selected tool again on your mouse. By holding down, so I can use it once. By holding down space, I can use it now multiple times. So that may be an important information for you. So, but in this case, I want to have only 2 generic buttons. Same thing for my blank button. I used it once, but I want to use it multiple times, so I hold down the space bar to delete these again. I want to use this generic buttons to make navigation jumps to my source page and my target page. There comes an additional improvement into the game, and now when I click here on these little arrows to select where I want to go to, you see now that well, this whole list extended a little bit. We come to this other layouts a little bit later. Right now we see the groups, what we had previously already. We have subpanels and we see our pages. So in this case, I want to jump to my source page. From this button, I select that. And you see that immediately this button gets a label, which is sources. And sources, that's the name we assign to that page. So if we do the same for targets, so we select the page targets, and you see that the generic button immediately gets that label from the page. So if we relabel these, also that label here will change dynamically. So it follows the page name. So that said, it's very important to label your pages. Not only for this application, but also for later on. I mentioned before that you can have multiple layouts within one panel under one panel ID. It makes it much easier for troubleshooting later on and looking through log files and so on if you have a good labeling in place and not just remain it on 1, 2, 3 and so on. And especially for this grouping and a group jump go-to buttons, it makes definitely sense to label these pages accordingly to their content. So now we can go there and jump to my source page. Obviously the source page right now is empty. And that's why we have to add here something. To add some sources, I open a master matrix view and I grab some sources. I select the first one, hold down Shift, select the last one I want to take, left mouse button, hold it down, drag and drop it to my panel, and drop it there. On the target side, the same thing. I go to the target page and I select, for instance, my target 1 and 2, drag and drop it here. So, and now I can navigate. I can go to escape. I get back to my landing page, which is the main page right now. I can jump to the source page, back with escape, target page, escape. So finally, let's look into the panel inheritance feature. So far, I've shown you some basic panel configuration and some changes to the editor view. I've shown you the new tree structure on the panel list, and now we want to see the actual panel inheritance. So to see the results on multiple panels, I opened some more VSM panel instances on the bottom of the screen. So right now we see panel layout 1. I open another VSM panel for layout 2, another VSM panel for layout ID 3, and this is a camera view of a LBP32 of a hardware panel showing layout ID 4. Now if we want to inherit a panel, we go to our panel list, we select the panel we want to make a parent, right click and say new inherited panel. So it offers us the next available number, which is 2 in this case. The name it gets is the parent name with the addition inherited in brackets. For the moment, that might be the most transparent solution, you can change that name later on at any time. Further below, you have a lot of checkboxes for all the options of a panel. Yeah, so all these options right now by default are inherited from the parent, but you can make local changes to these as well. So just partially or just make them all locally and specific for the inherited panel. It's default set to inherit from parent, and we leave it like this for the moment. Okay. Now immediately you see at the bottom of the screen where we show the VSM panel with its which is showing layout ID 2, that this is showing now the same layout. You can go to the inherited panel now, double click on it, and open also the editor view for this. So we have them side by side. On the bottom we see the parent panel, layout 1, and above we see the inherited panel, layout 2. Let's take the same page so we can compare it. On the inherited panel, you see, first instance, on the left-hand side, for each page, you see an eye, which shows you that this is an inherited page. On the page itself, you see the buttons carry all an eye behind the button number, which shows us that's an inherited button. And you see grayed out assignments like sources and targets, these generic buttons, which show different on an inherited version because they are inherited, they are not locally assigned, they are grayed out a little bit. Same for the escape button. So when I do a local change to this panel, that's possible. So I take maybe another generic button and add it here. And maybe also I assign a new page to that panel. I can do that. I say new page, and I call this local page. You see there's not an eye on this page because that's just locally created. Let's go back to the main page and make this third generic button a jump or a go-to button to my local page. I select this one. You see now that this button is popping up in bold color, so that's a local change, while the inherited buttons are a little bit grayed out. Obviously, on the parent panel, you would not see that local page. So still, you're able to do now changes on the parent panel, obviously, that affect the child panel. So let's go to that parent panel and assign another button here, which might be just the next button, just for simplification here. I assign a next button to this button, to button 3. But you see that this is not reflected on the child panel because obviously I made a local change there. When I take that same next button, I put it on my next, on the next free button, you see that this is immediately reflected also on the inherited panel because that button was still inherited. Let's make here differentiation and make this next and back. And here on my inherited panel, I have here a jump or go to button on the same spot where I have a next button on my parent. If I decide later on my inherited panel, I need the inheritance back. You can at any time go back to this local assigned button, make a right click, go down to inheritance and re-invoke the button inheritance. Once I do that, I immediately get the parent version of the parent assignment to that button also to my inherited panel. Before continuing, I think at this point it's important to mention the terminology cells and buttons. While in the beginning I was explaining that on the layout view you can change the size and position of buttons, this might have been not the correct terminology for this, because what we have here is actually not a button, but it's a cell. So you will face this terminology cells now also in some dialogues. So when I do a right click on such a cell, you see here the terminology or the line park cell, you see unpark cell, and you have delete cell. So while in the past you would only read button in these places, we now made a differentiation or had to make a differentiation between the actually position and the size and the geometry of such a button, which is now determined as a cell, and the actually assignment and the function to such cell, which is then a button, which can be clicked. So when we go on our inherited panel, we can show what that means. When we go, for instance, to our escape button, and we would like, let's go on the layout view of this button here, and we would say, I would like to have that escape button bigger on my inherited panel. There's a message popping up that this operation will break the inheritance of the selected item, and if you want to continue. I say yes, I take this into account, I know what I'm doing. You see that this button now is not inherited anymore, so the I is missing. When I go to my page, yeah, I have a big button now in this place. It still is grayed out because the assignment is still coming from my parent panel. I just changed the cell appearance, but I didn't change the button assignment. So therefore, when I want to go back to my parent cell size, I would go here, right click and go here on inheritance, and you see I can re-invoke the cell inheritance. While before, when I was changing back the assignment of the button, I used the re-invoke the button inheritance. So when I re-invoke the cell inheritance, you see that now my size goes back to the size of the cell on the parent. And also when I go to my layout, it's inherited again. Yeah, you see that. So that's important to understand, that we have now a differentiation between cells and buttons, also especially in the dialogues and in the configuration dialogues. Then what you may mention or may recognize is that there's a park cell. So as you can maybe imagine, is that when you on your layout and you create, for instance, a new cell, I don't have create a new cell here, right? And I realize, oh, I just don't need that cell anymore because I don't want to put something in this place and it's just taking away, it's just not clean on my panel, and you want to get rid of this. So in the past, you would have selected this and moved it out of the panel with your arrow keys, for instance, or you may have grabbed this and moved it out of the panel, which is not possible anymore. But that's a good thing, because now you would just say right click and you say, I want to park that cell. And the system automatically parks it in an organized way outside of your actual panel. So if you park now, let's park this button for now. Yeah, it gives me a message again because I changed something of the inheritance here, because it's an inherited cell. Yes, I know what I'm doing. You see it organizes them in a sequential way outside of the panel. So you don't have to worry where to place your unused buttons anymore. The system will park them for you. In addition to that, at any time when you decide, I need this button back, you can select this again, right click and unpark it. And the system will automatically park it in the position where it was before. So right now it's not inherited anymore. So I have to re-invoke the cell inheritance afterwards as well. Yeah? Same for this one, I can unpark this cell, or I can even say I want to delete it because I don't want to see it anymore. Yeah? The parking of a cell is very important to know that also the assignment of a cell, so even the button assignment, can be parked with that cell. So let's go to our source page. I do that on my main page, on my parent panel for the moment. So I go to my sources here on my parent panel and I say I don't need my source 5 anymore, but I don't want to delete that button because I may need it later on and I want to remember that there was something. Yes. So you select that button, right click, and you park that cell. You see it's gone from the panel, but it's with its button assignment, this cell is parked outside of the actual panel. So it's not showing up anymore on the real panel. So when I go to my panel and go to the source page, you see that my source 5 is gone on the parent because I moved it outside the panel. And it's not in this frame, so you don't see it. But I can at any time go back here, right click and say I want to unpark it, and it will bring it back in the same spot where it was before. So let's look into an application example where panel inheritance can help you a lot to speed up the panel configuration process. So I deleted the existing panels and start from scratch, and with a new one we call VT operator 1. So that VT operator 1 has an LBP 32. In this case, we start with a rather simple layout, which is one page, straight head, and he has some sources and 2 targets into his specific machine. So now I have more than this one operator. So I just create an inherited version of that VT1 panel. So I create one for VT operator 2. He immediately can work, but he's using the same targets, which is unlikely. So he has different targets because he's using a different machine. So I just change locally to different targets for his panel. So the same I do for my VT op 3. Okay, VT op 3. And again, he has some different targets. I just changed these targets. And finally, I have also a VT operator 4. And he gets also his specific targets. So all operators can work now on their specific machines. So they have all the source selection, they have all their specific targets, and they can work. Now, if someone decides, okay, that layout is not nice, so I want to have a space here in between, you just go to the parent panel, VT op 1, and move that button around, and you see that this is reflected immediately on all child panels. Also, if there's a decision, okay, we have more sources now, we need more sources, it's just one drag and drop operation, and all operators can work now with that new sources to their specific destinations. And that's a simple, a basic configuration with sources and targets, but obviously you're flexible to add more things on navigation. Everything will be reflected the same way from parent to the inherited panel as long as there's not a local modification to a specific cell or button. And by the way, while configuring here on multiple panels and opening multiple editor views, a new thing you may recognize is that if I switch between these two panels, that toolbar is remaining always the same in the same spot. Yeah, so wherever you select it, if you're working on BT-OB1 panel and you select something from the toolbar, or if you go then back to your panel edit 3, you can use the same toolbar for multiple opened windows. Also, a change to previous versions to mention is that if you open the same panel again, so if you double click by mistake on the same one, it will not open multiple versions of that same panel. It will just remain that one. It just will keep up that one panel layout window. Let's look into another application example with panel inheritance. So therefore, we create a new panel, call it Facility Master. Take LBP 32 in this case, start with the main page, and we assume that this panel has access to nearly everything in that whole facility, like external stuff, like Studio One resources. And just as an example, we can grab something here from the matrix and Studio 2 stuff, which are different resources, obviously, and maybe Studio 3, which is using different resources again. So then now in this facility, let's say first on the main page, let's add some navigation buttons for these subgroups. So we can navigate there, external, Studio 1, Studio 2, and Studio 3. Now we keep that open and we create now an inherited version of this, and for instance call this Studio One Engineering, because there we have also operators who use a lot of resources, but obviously they need some restrictions because they are not supposed to utilize Studio 2 or 3 resources. So right now all changes are reflected right from my parent panel to the engineering panel. On the engineering panel, I now get rid of these two buttons because he's not supposed to see Studio 2 and 3 resources. Okay, now we already restricted Studio 1 engineering, but in Studio 1 we have also other operators. So maybe operators who are supposed to see even less than that. So we can now go in here and create a new inherited panel from the inherited panel and say that's Studio One operator. Okay, now we have an inherited version of an inherited panel. We open this as well. So we see now that restrictions here. So what we could do now is, for instance, say, okay, on my engineering panel, just locally for my Studio One area, because that engineer here is the master for my Studio One, we could go in here and say, we create a new page, and that's called local stuff. On my main page, I add here a button which refers to my local stuff page. You see that's a bold button because that's a local change, so that's locally assigned, and it's immediately popping up also on the operator panel because it's an inherited version of the engineering panel, while the parent panel doesn't have that button. So during daily operation, maybe it's going even further, so that the operator requests that he needs direct access on his main page to some targets to be even faster to assign his machines. So you assign some targets to this and some sources for direct access as well. So we could go on and on and on and make an additional inheritance. Now if we go with the example of the VT operator before, where you have many operators doing a similar job, just using different targets, for instance, but using the same layout of panel, we could go on and make an inherited version even of this one. So we could call this op2, and now we have even an inherited version of this one. And we could go on and modify this one. So we could say, okay, my operator 1 gets target 1, and on my operator 2, he gets target 2. So we have 4 panels which are still related to the parent panel. So that means on the parent panel, I still could do, let's just take a disconnect button and place it here. It will still be reflected. That was assigned to the wrong panel. Sorry for that. You see, I was editing my Studio One Op2. So I minimize that one, go back to my facility master panel, take the disconnect again and throw it here. So you see this now reflected on all my panels. So especially for operator panel, it's very likely that more often the requests change and that you have to modify the panel. So let's even go in here and say that they would park these 2 cells. Yeah, then it notifies me again that this will break the inheritance of some selected items. I accept that, and I make this button here bigger, or excuse me, that cell. I have to be on the layout tab to do that. Operation break the inheritance, that's accepted again. And then we go and take a parameter here from an Ember tree. Let's grab an audio channel level and assign it here to the main page. And make this a slider even. Yeah, so that panel changed a lot now. And maybe at one point you would find it useful that this panel, or it's requested that much, and it's a mature version on its own, that you would like to make this a parent panel itself. So this one, the Studio One operator panel. So therefore we could now in this example get rid of this panel 4 and say, okay, my panel 3, that's such a good layout, and I would like now to make this in a parent panel itself. So therefore I can go in here, right click, and say I want to make a copy of that selected one, a flat copy. When I do this, it will make a standalone version with all the currently assigned stuff, even the inherited from the parent, and make a standalone version of that. So I do that, copy selected as a flat one. It offers me the next free number. And I could get rid of this label now with inherit because it's not inherited anymore then. And then it's Studio One operator. And from this operator panel, then I can go on and obviously make my new inherited versions. So then it would be my operator 2. would be inherited from this one again, and so on. And it starts a complete new tree from here. You see, these are all local assignments now, not anymore related to the facility master. In regards of the copy of these structures here, we could also go in here and say, yeah, that facility master tree is a good one, but I would like to make some changes to the facility master. Maybe for facility 2, it has different resources, so the structure is good, but you need to make changes to it. So you could go in here, right click and say, I want to copy that hierarchy. It notifies me that what it will do, it's starting with number 6, so panel ID number 6, and it will create a hierarchy like it is here in the facility master tree. I say yes, and you see now with starting with panel ID number 6, it's creating that same hierarchy, but it's a new one. So I can now go in here and make complete different assignments. Maybe the underlying resources are different because it's a facility number 2. And picking up the topic landing page again. So I mentioned it in the very beginning. So that green arrow here shows the landing page, which is accessed when you execute the escape button. So I add another escape button here on that panel 1, and make it a show on all pages. So we see it now also on our panel down there while we are in a studio subsection. Okay, now normally what happens is when I execute that escape button, it would go back to my very first page of the panel. Now it's possible to also define a landing page. So that means that not mandatorily it goes back to the first page on a layout, but it could be a different one. So the first startup of a panel will always go to the first page, but later on it could be defined that you have another page, which is which you call menu, where you have all your important stuff to select from. And you make this your landing page. So I can go here, right click, set page as landing page. You see that green arrow jumps there. And now from there on, I can go, when I click my escape button, it will go to this page. Yeah? It will not go back to the main page, but will go back to that menu page. Another important thing to mention is multiple layouts within one panel design. So therefore, let's look into a new panel and call it master panel and take our layout LBP32 again and create a new page. We call that the main page. So this is now our layout 0. That's you see that headline. And it has a button layout of 32 buttons here. And I can have multiple pages here like seen before. But I can also go here and say I want a new layout. You see, I get a blank panel screen now here. And I can create new cells one by one, or I can also say change the panel size or layout. And here I want to have my like 8 buttons, so it looks like LBP 8 on this page. So that's a new layout. That's not a page where I can assign something. That's here main. It's like this main page. So where I could drag and drop sources, targets. Here I have a new layout and I can create a new page under this new layout. And this I could, for instance, I hold shift and I increase these buttons. This I could use, for instance, to assign audio faders, which obviously need completely different button styles. So let's grab some audio parameters here. That's my first audio channel, second audio channel, third and 4th. And let's change the style to sliders. Okay, so now I have sliders on this page. On my main layout here, I can now again add some navigation. Call that to my main page. And you see now when I go in here and want to select to a go-to, I see here pages and I see my main page because that's below this here, that's within this layout 0. I have above here, I have other layouts. Here I can select new layout number 1, which is currently not very handy because I didn't label it nicely. So the layout 0 cannot be relabeled. That stays the same, but I can relabel this layout here. And this I could label audio layout. And my page I could call audio gains. Yeah, so the labeling is quite important for it makes your life much easier in the further configuration process and also later in log files, like I said. So when I go now to my main page again, and here I jump to my main page, and here I want to go to audio layout and the audio gain page. So therefore I go to other layouts. Now I see here audio layout, that's my layout. And below that I see my audio gains page. And I select this and I see also a different signalization here. If it's a local page under the 0 layout, it shows up just with a number. If it's a different layout, it comes up with a little L in front of that. Yeah, and when I open my panel now, I can now go to my audio gains page where I have now completely different layouts, button layout, just my 4 sliders. And what I'm missing here, again, it's always helpful to have a way to get back, like an escape button with show on all pages, which again, that's a good example because it's not under it shows on all pages within this layout. The audio layout, this button is actually not available. It's a different set of buttons. They start with the same numbering, but it's a different level of buttons. So therefore, if I want to have a button here as well, an escape button, I would need to place it here, for instance. So now I can jump here to between different layouts, and I'm still in the same panel design layout, which is ID 1. So that helps a lot for more complex user GUIs where you have to have different arrays of buttons, different styles of buttons, different sizes, a lot of text boxes may be involved or stuff like that. Obviously, also layouts are inherited. So if we inherit a panel, which also has even has multiple layouts, and we look into that one. If we go in that inherited panel and make a local change to that layout, so let's go to that audio layout and maybe change that. Sorry, change that button here. I get a notification. So that's a local change now. Again, yes. Also, if I change the whole panel size, it notifies me, yes. So I have now the possibility to change it completely. At any time, I'm able to go back if I make a right click and go inheritance, and I can now, you don't see that like this. So if I go here and make a right click and say inheritance, I can now re-invoke the layout inheritance. Same thing is if I go in here, and so this is now a cell inheritance, yeah, because I changed the cell. What I did here before was the layout with the big border. And in addition, I can also create new cells. I showed that before. And when I do a right click, I have also the possibility to go and to say remove the local cells. So it will remove my locally created cells. So these are the ways to get back to the original inherited state. One more thing to mention is the usage of mimic buttons in combination with panel inheritance. So therefore, we have a look on the an inherited panel and right click in the properties. We see in the settings, which I introduced or explained in the beginning, at the bottom, we have a specific check mark here for mimic and assign enables. By default, it's inherited from the parent. So that means mimic buttons are assigned to the parent and will be reflected to the inherited panels. I assign something to that mimic button on the parent, it will follow on the inherited panel. So that's not always desired. So therefore I can make uncheck this box and make local selection for that. So let's start with the checkbox disable the assignability. I check this one only, okay. And then we go to our parent and assign some mimic buttons. Hold down space bars to create multiple. Okay, so now I assigned these mimic buttons to my master. I see them also on the inherited panel in the edit view. You won't see them in the panel GUI on the bottom of the screen for the inherited panel. That's because the operator is not supposed to assign these mimic buttons on the inherited version. When I go to the parent version and I hold down the first mimic button and assign, for instance, target 5 to it, you see it will appear on both versions, on the master, on the parent, as well as on the inherited. It's just not possible to assign this button on the inherited version. So that's done by this setting. Let's select the other settings. So I take this checkbox away and immediately you would see that mimic buttons popping up, by the way, now on the inherited version. So let's go into properties and say disable the inherit from panel, inherit from parent. So what's now the situation is when I want to assign the second mimic button on the parent, starts blinking and I select source 4. It's assigned to that mimic button of the parent, but not assigned to the mimic button on the child. So the child button now has, it follows the mimic button assignment to the panel, but it will not assign the assignment to the mimic button as such. But I'm still able to go to my inherited panel now and hold down the second mimic button and I can assign target 1 to it. So that's still possible. I hope you enjoyed today's session, so I hope to welcome you back soon. Bye.